Point and Click Productions in association with Portland Mindfulness Therapy and myself, Joe Ryan, licensed psychologist, coming at you from here in Portland, Oregon, tying up this 3-installment mini-series of on the theme trying to explicate the unexplicable, the inexplicable, regarding Buddhism, and specifically the, really failing my words today. I'm not sure why that is. My brain is getting old. I'm 51 now and my beard is all gray. When we started back in 2013 with this YouTube business, I looked a little different. On the theme of non-existence, on the theme of the doctrine of no self, as it is phrased in Zen Buddhism, and it is common across all streams of Buddhism in one form or another. This non-existence of self, as we'll tie up some loose ends today, we'll note that it's not just we ourselves who do not exist, although that's the big deal. That's the one that's the hardest to swallow. It's also the emptiness of all things. Now, in the West, generally speaking, saying that something is empty is not generally thought of as a good thing. And indeed, this is a translation. One translation is empty. Others have suggested things like interconnected. So that's a little different, isn't it? I mean, I like my you-know-who's iced coffee, and if it were empty, then that would mean I'd have nothing left to drink, and that's not what we want, right? We like the glass at least half empty. But when Buddhists say empty, we mean something different. We mean empty of what some philosophers, and if I'm remembering correctly, Nietzsche termed the thing in itself. I don't think he coined the term. He mentioned it to annihilate it and say there is no thing in itself. He was in turn perhaps influenced by Buddhists, but mostly he was working in the Western philosophical tradition, and he was targeting on the brainy intellectual side a similar issue of, is there an essence of any thing, any object? Does this rock have some kind of internal essence to it that is the thing in itself? Or is it just a series of appearances and properties, like if you whack it against my head repeatedly, eventually it's going to start to hurt. And Nietzsche said, no, it doesn't have anything. It's empty of, it is devoid of any properties that are intrinsic to it, other than all the properties that are apparent. What is apparent is what is. What can be measured is what is. And this really gave a boost to science, among other things. And then, the Nazis went on to completely misuse Nietzsche, and Nietzsche himself was a little cuckoo throughout his life, and then so much so at the end of his life that he couldn't write. But I digress. Buddhism, like Western philosophy, or like continental philosophy, and I believe also it's all alternative Anglo-Scottish American empiricist philosophy, tends to say essentialism doesn't work. It's really just there's a sophisticated form of what in tribal societies has been termed from the outside animism, that there's not really a spirit of this rock, or not any useful way. Talking about that would not be useful for you and me in the 21st century in this culture. There may be great uses for that in other cultures, and there may indeed be some ways of reviving animism, but not in the intuitive way that we tend to do on a day-to-day basis. That way is termed by some essentialism. I find I'm really throwing a lot of terms out. Let's bring it all back home. Let's throw out all the isms, and let's go back to Buddhism. The one ism that we're really interested in is, what do we mean by empty of self? We mean just that. We mean that this cup of coffee is not made out of trillions of little cups of coffee. And there's no one place where the cup of coffee is organized. It is unto itself, but it has no essence. Just as we are unto ourselves, but there's no little guy in here controlling the whole thing. And that means if we study anything, any experience, or in some Buddhist scriptures, any Dharma, Dharma is used on the one hand as the teaching of Buddhism as a whole, a term that refers to all Buddhist teaching. It also is used as a technical term, what might be called a sense datum in Western philosophy, a dharma, something we can sense, something we can perceive. All dharmas are marked by emptiness, says the Heart Sutra, most beloved sutra to Zen Buddhism. Short little thing, easily fits on a page. One of the recurring themes is that all dharmas, all things, all that which we can perceive, including ourselves, is empty, is marked by emptiness, is of the character of interdependence. So here we get into maybe something a little bit philosophical, but practical. A pen is a pen. Remember the pen I took apart in one of the other videos? A pen is a pen because of all the things that it isn't. It's a pen because of its function. Now we're going to see a connection back to my old videos about ACT, which, although I may not have expounded on the philosophy of functional contextualism, sorry, another long term, but the underlying philosophical underpinnings of ACT are similar in some ways to Buddhism or Zen Buddhism, in that what something is more about what its function is, right? I mean, we can call a lot of things pens. I wish I had more examples here, but just grabbing a handful of them. There's a lot of different forms. That probably sounds wonderful. We're back. I disrupted us. Anyhow, there are a lot of different forms that can have the same function, more or less, the function to mark things. All dharmas are marked by emptiness. Get it? Mark as in marker. Oh, I am so funny. Anyhow, it is a pen because of what it functions as. And it is a pen, it can only be a pen in a context in which, well, pens have a function. So it is in some ways just as much defined by what it isn't as what is defined by what it is. And that sounds mystical, but let's make it a little more concrete. If there were not people here who needed pens and who needed to use pens for this function of writing, that whole structure, that whole context, that whole well, I can't think of a better word. The giant superstructure of society around which this pen exists helps define the pen. So in a sense, it's defined by itself, but it can't be in a vacuum. Things don't exist meaningfully in a vacuum. If it was floating off in space, we might just call it a piece of debris. However, down here on Earth, it functions for me and you and everyone else as the beloved pen that we know. And so, that being the case, it exists in relation to all that's around it. So too do you and I exist in relation to all that's around us. And an intuitive, gut level, embodied, full grasp of this, deep in our personality and using our whole personality, feeling fully our interconnectedness with all that is around us, is part of the essence of Buddhism. And of course, here I can't resist but tell the old joke that I personally like of the Buddhist who goes to a hot dog stand and says, "Make me one with everything." Now, my dear dad, who passed not too long ago, used to mess this one up and say, Buddhist goes to a hot dog stand and says, "I'll have one with everything." He's a great guy. He had trouble telling recited jokes. Anyhow, I hope that our brief, inexpert, bumbling, random explanation of no self, or by the same token, emptiness, non-being or the non-reality of self has been at least somewhat clarifying. I also hope it raised more questions than it answered. Someone recently on Quora, a philosopher whose work I like on Quora, and we've gone back and forth a little bit. She's posed questions to me. I've posed questions to her. She pointed out to all of us reading her work on Quora that philosophy is not about answers. It's about raising questions. I do say again and again, this isn't philosophy. It is and it isn't. What a surprise, yet again. Well, this is the end of this video, and it isn't. We'll see you soon.